There we go. And I want to welcome everybody. We're just going to give people just one more minute. The format of this conversation is going to be in webinar format. So unfortunately, we won't be able to see you. You will be able to see us. But of course, feel free at any point to put all of your questions into the chat. You can either put them publicly or you can direct them directly to, I would say direct them to me because I will be kind of organizing them and we'll take it from there. So we're just going to give it one more minute. I know that it's lunchtime for some people and dinner time for other people, and everybody's just kind of settling into the moment.
We have no idea who's here. That's so weird.
No, we do know. We do know. You can hit the attendees list, so you can see on the side. I'm saying, but we can't see them. Okay. So, hi, I just want to welcome everybody. My name is Daphne Lazar-Price. I'm the Executive Director of JOFA, the Jewish Orthodox Feminist Alliance. I want to welcome all of you for this important conversation, whether it's timely or relevant in your life, or whether it's information that you think it's important to know for down the road, something that you might be anticipating in your own life or in a friend's life or in a family member's life. But this is going to be a conversation about navigating the Beit Din in times of divorce. There are other uses of the Beit Din, in particular, sometimes intercommunal negotiations, or more notably conversion. But this conversation is going to center itself around the divorce process, because one of the things that we have come to learn, in mostly unfortunate circumstances, is that when it comes time to get divorced, people just don't even know where to begin, what questions to ask, what to look for, who to ask, in what order. And so that's going to be the crux of this conversation. I want to thank our panelists, Blu Greenberg, Keshet Starr, and Shoshanna Keats Jaskoll. I'll just do a brief introduction of all of them. I feel like, do people really need, is there anybody who doesn't know who you are? And as I was thinking about how to frame this, I was like, these are the Aguna angels. So thank you to all of you for all of the work that you've done, whether it's been for decades or years, or and for those of you who are attending, if you're doing work in your own right, I want to thank everybody for being a part of this. Blu Greenberg is JOFA's founding president. She's been involved in Jewish feminism for 4 decades. She was the conference chair of both the first and the second International Conference in Feminism and Orthodoxy. She chaired the Newark Federation Task Force on Jewish Women and the AJC National Jewish Family Center, and was president of the Jewish Book Council. She also currently serves as the president of the board of directors of the International Bastion, and she serves on the editorial board of Hadassah Magazine and the advisory board of Lilith. She's married to Rabbi Keith Greenberg, and together they have 5 children and 23 grandchildren. Shoshanna Keats Jaskoll is an American Israeli activist and writer whose work focuses on women's rights in Orthodox Judaism and the visibility of women in Israel's Orthodox communities. She was born and raised in Lakewood, New Jersey, in a Jewish but non-Orthodox family. After moving to Israel in 2007, Keats Jaskoll gained public attention through her co-founding and leadership of a women's advocacy group, Chochmat Nashim, which works towards a healthy Orthodox community and Israeli society by fighting damaging trends. You can read her work in the Jerusalem Post, the Times of Israel, the UK Jewish Chronicle, the Forward, or visit her site at www.skjaskoll.com. And Keshet Starr is the executive director of the Organization for the Resolution of Agunot, I think better known as ORA, the nonprofit organization addressing the Aguna crisis on a case-by-case basis worldwide. At ORA, Keshet oversees advocacy and early intervention initiatives designed to assist individuals seeking a Jewish divorce, along with the prevention initiatives to eliminate abuse from the Jewish divorce process. Keshet has written for outlets such as Times of Israel, The Forward, and Haaretz, and frequently presents on issues related to Jewish divorce, domestic abuse, and the intersection between civil and religious divorce processes. She's authored academic work focused on get refusal and domestic abuse, and is a Wexner Field Fellow. Keshet is a graduate of University of Michigan and the University of Pennsylvania Law School, and she lives in central New Jersey with her husband and 3 young children. So I'm really eager to dive in to these questions, and we're going to do this in kind of question and answer format. People should feel free to jump in. One thing that I want to note at the outset that I think people are aware of, but I want to be mindful that the answers differ whether you are in Israel or really the rest of the globe. For the rest of the globe, this is really going to be a US-based conversation, and certainly there are going to be relevant pieces for other parts of the globe. But there is like a stark line that divides between divorce in Israel and divorce in the US, and we'll get into some of that. So I guess at the outset, what is the first step when a couple decides or an individual decides that she wants to get divorced? What is the first step? Does she go to the Beit Din first? Does she go to a lawyer first? Does she go to a mediator first? And maybe also if we can talk for a minute about the functions of the Beit Din and the lawyer in this case, and whether they work together or not. Who wants to
I would say first step is that even before a mediator, a lawyer, a Beit Din, is to find a friend who will stay with you throughout the whole process. Could be a relative, a good friend, even a parent, sibling, just not to go through this alone. That applies to men and women going through a divorce. And then I think the next step, the best next step would be a mediator if this divorce has the promise of being an amicable divorce, or even maybe not even so amicable, but at least open to mediation, which is, first of all, it's cheaper. It's, I think it's just more humane. And however, in a case of real abuse, the best thing is to do whatever is faster, and mediation is not necessarily faster. And that means sometimes a lawyer or going straight to the Beit Din. And when it's irreconcilable differences, or whether it's verified or certified, you know, a blemish, a mum, or a quality in the spouse that just can't be retrained. And we know a lot more today than we did yesteryear about certain qualities in human beings that are just not, you can't cure them. There's psychological ailments and you can't cure them. So that the faster one does this, the better. By the way, I want to give thanks to, I think these are wonderful questions that you asked of us, really terrific questions. And I think you, Daphne, and Keshet put this together, if I'm not mistaken. I learned a lot from your questions, and not only from your questions, but I want to just give a shout out to a Rabbi Dollinger, Rabbi Barry Dollinger, who is our very new executive director of the Beit Din. And I asked him for help on the questions. I didn't think he was going to go to the extent of answering every question for me in great detail. So I'm the winner in this exercise here. I learned a lot.
Thank you for saying that. If mediation is not an option, Shoshanna, let's focus on Israel for a second. What is the preference? Run to the Beit Din first or run to the civil court first?
It's such a horrible, you know, as we're talking in the, like, you know, what happens when you realize that your marriage isn't going to work? And we as activists and people in the know are like very tachlis oriented. But I just want to take a step back because I actually get this conversation. I get this question a lot. In fact, someone this week asked me about, you know, it's not going to work. We're in therapy. I know it's not going to work. How do I prepare myself? So I think when you're already recognizing that it's not going to work, I do think you need to consider, I think a mediator is the best way to go for a lot of reasons, especially here. If you come here to the Beit Din with an agreement signed, your chances of getting in and out fast are much, much, much higher, much higher. And so the best thing to do, honestly, is to try. And if you need to have family members involved, get family members involved. Sometimes when it's not just the two of you, acrimoniously, sometimes people can help you do things better for the kids, for the this, for whatever it is, and just work it out. And I will just say, like, if you can do that, do that. There are wonderful mediators here who know how to write the agreements. They know how to make it so that when you walk in, you have a better chance of getting in and out. I know people who've done it. So that's first of all. Second of all, if you are in a different situation where you know this is going to be a fight, where you want out and he does not, or you both want out, but he insists on certain things and you're not going to get out without giving up a lot, which happens, unfortunately, too often. Women give up their rights, their visitation, their lots of, inheritance, lots of things can be taken from you when they know you want your get. I would say the first place to visit, honestly, in this country is Yad L'Isha, because they give free legal advice before you even get there, right? You could sit there for 2 hours and they'll say to you, listen, this is really cut and dried. This is what I suggest. Or let's go right now to the Beit Din and file, or the Beit Mishpat and file. So Daphne, you mentioned, Beit Mishpat is the family court and Beit Din is the religious court. And there's two separate tracks here. The only place that can give you a get, or that can arrange your get, don't give it to you, to arrange your get, is the Beit Din, is the rabbinic court in this country. You can go to the family court to do division of rechush, possessions, and thank you, children, and all that kind of stuff. But in order to do the actual get, you will end up in the Beit Din no matter what. So it depends on your situation. I'm not going to tell anyone to run to the Beit Mishpat. However, you can speak to me, you can speak to the people at Yad L'Isha, and then I think we can save the rest of that progress for other questions. But that's my initial response.
Thank you. Also, I want to just, I need to add a disclaimer that I should have added in the beginning, but I also want to clarify, Blu, to what you said before, that this really was a team effort. It was Keshet and Shoshanna and my colleague, Sarah, who's the Wizard of Oz of everything, who really pitched in. But I also just want to add a disclaimer also as I pose this question to Keshet, and that is that I should have said at the outset that this event is for informational purposes, and it's actually not intended to replace consultation with a halachic advisor or attorney, and it's not intended to give legal or halachic advice. So this is informational, and you should take with this and think about if you're in the situation, what you need to do next. Keshet, slightly different approach in the US, maybe.
Definitely. And just to build on what's been shared so far, I would say first question at the outset is, are you in a safe situation? Because if you're not, and we at ORA are primarily dealing with people in situations of domestic violence, we know domestic violence can turn to homicide quickly. So if you're in an unsafe situation, everything else is totally different because the priority is to get you safe. And that might mean moving faster than we would move in other scenarios. Assuming safety is not an issue, everyone's safe. Then what I cannot stress enough is slow down on the brakes long enough to educate yourself about the process before you act. Sometimes there's a real pressure to do things and sign things and get it going. But what I can't emphasize enough is to just know your rights under the law, and know your rights in halacha, in Jewish law. At ORA, we run a helpline where people call when they're thinking about divorce in the early stages. And we created it just because we wanted people to have that knowledge right at the beginning when it matters, because you do have rights in all of these systems, but very often, not enough people, I should say, not no one, you have multiple people on this call that are here to give you that information, but the system is not going to come right out and say, here are all your rights. You really have to go get that information. And I tell women all the time, I would rather you spend 6 months debating which Beis Din you're going to go to, or Beis Din versus court, than sign it today and spend 6 years regretting it because you're stuck in a process that isn't working. So do your research before. The interactions between court and Beis Din are complex. And in terms of where to go, people ask all the time. It's an unsatisfying answer, but the really true answer is that it depends, because not all Batei Din are created equal, not all court systems are created equal. And the number one factor is, what do you need most of all? Some people call and they say, I need a get, that's my number one priority. Let's focus on the get, I'll deal with the other stuff later. And we get other phone calls from people who say, you know what, gets are awesome, but my electricity is getting turned off in 2 days if I don't have $3,000 moved to this account and I can't get my ex to pay his support obligations. That's a totally different track. And so what we really try to do is listen to what people value most and create a process around that. And so number one piece of advice, it's different for every case, and just know that there are people out there, and I think I can speak for all of us on this call, that we play that role every day, and we are here to play that role, that there are people here to help, get advice, you have rights, learn what they are, so that you can go into the process not in a sort of magical system where everything's going to work great, but with the knowledge of how it works so that you can put yourself in a position of strength.
Daphne,
Yes.
Can we have a conversation too amongst
Sure.
ourselves? Okay.
Yes.
So,
By the way, if we need a part 2, we'll do a part 2. But go ahead.
no, I think I want to just, Keshet's point was about, making sure you go to the right, this phone wasn't working at all. And now, of course, when unfortunately, there are corrupt dating, and there are, and they're around, and women fall into a hole when they go to a corrupt dating, and they don't know it until it's too late. So that's one, I wanted to reiterate that. And there are many good dating, but there are also many bad dating, and attempt to clean them up, centralize and clean them up has been a very significant effort, but still we hear horror stories. The other thing I really want to ask Shoshanna, if you could, I think Yad L'Isha is a wonderful organization, and really has a great deal of heart and puts itself out for women. But there are two other, several others, but among them, Mavoy Satum, and also the Center for Women's Justice. And why would you what would you say about a woman appealing to those two? What's the difference there?
So the difference is that Mavoy Satum and Center for Women's Justice usually take precedent-setting cases, meaning if let's say something about this case will, your specific case will enable them to potentially change a law or a policy, Mavoy Satum will take it. For example, Shira, I'm blanking on her name. I think Shira, I forgot her last name. Thank you, was nearly killed by her husband. I mean, she spent 6 to 9 months recovering from his attack on her and her child. And it was a national case. Like, it was national news, I should say. And she comes out of the hospital after nearly being killed. And the next headline is, the guy who tried to kill her is refusing her divorce. So immediately, Mavoy Satum steps in and they're like, this is for us, right? The idea that a woman whose husband tried to kill her could possibly keep her in chains is psychotic. But they took on the case. We actually went down to the Beit because he was put in jail and he came out, whatever. Sorry, I'm getting sidetracked. They take precedent-setting cases or cases that are national interest and then potentially could lead to change in policy. So for example, what they wanted to do is, it should be yashal, that a person who tries to kill his wife or vice versa, they go straight into solitary confinement and are forced to give a get. Like, there should be no pass and go and no collecting $200. So that was something that they worked in. The Center for Women's Justice works specifically also with tort cases. So for example, if a woman has been denied a divorce for, let's say, 3, 5, 10, 12 years, they will go to family court, or civil court, I should say, and sue him for damages. Meaning they're not even able to, they're not in Bet Din fighting for a get, they're suing for damages. And sometimes the result is the guy will say, fine, don't sue me, I'll give you the get. But Yad L'Isha takes any woman for whatever she needs through the divorce process, even if it's not a case that's going to potentially change policy or be relevant for a tort case. And they also give you the free legal advice. I don't believe that Center for Women's Justice gives free advice, but I could be wrong, and if so, I apologize.
Thank you for
They
that.
could. I should ask. I'll ask.
That was actually a very helpful clarification, because there are a lot of players, a lot of very important players in the field, and it's interesting to hear where each one centers its or focuses its efforts. I want to go back to the question of the rogue Beit Din, because we hear this a lot. I actually want to pose this to Keshet first. And we hear a lot about rogue batei din. So first of all, what does that mean? And how would we even know how to look? It's actually like, well, yes, how do we know how to look for that Beit Din, or how to choose a Beit Din? Maybe it's part of a broader question of like, how do you choose a Beit Din? But I want to first focus on the rogue Beit Din.
Sure. So just to put a bit of framing, just for anyone in the audience that's not familiar, when it comes, a lot of times in the US, this takes us a minute to get used to, because I cannot create like a New Jersey court in my backyard if I feel like it. That's not a thing. But in the Bastion world, you absolutely can. Anyone can create a Bastion at any time for any reason, which is not necessarily true in Israel, which is why, again, you need those distinctions of areas. But in the US, a lot of times we feel like, oh, if it's something on letterhead from a Bastion, it's got to be sort of through this like central organizing capacity of some sort. Not the case at all. Anyone can create a Bastion. Sometimes you Google the addresses on those letterheads and they don't exist. So what that leaves you with is a universe where there is tremendous variation in the standards, the procedures of the different batei din, and that makes it really messy on the ground, because it's like, imagine a baseball, championship, playoff, whatever it's called, and everyone's playing with a different rule book, and you're all trying to like get through this tournament together. It gets really complicated, and so it is absolutely a sort of caveat emptor, as they say, a buyer beware situation. As the participant in the process, you must research these forums. They are not the same. Now, in that wild west of a lot of different forums doing a lot of different things, there are still sort of like tents and forums that are kind of outside those tents. And so a great example of this is when it comes to, say, a heter me rabbanim, which is a sort of permission of 100 rabbis. It's something that would allow, in a situation where a husband wants to issue the get, his wife is saying, nope, I'm not going to accept it. There is this sort of exception that would allow the husband to then marry a second wife. Mainstream batei din don't want to touch this. It's super messy. They will generally only consider it if the wife is in a vegetative state. So you're talking about a sort of extreme and tragic situation. There is a rogue Bastion in Monsey that, for the price of, last I heard, about 50,000, will give you a heter me rabbanim that you can use to go and remarry, except you have to fly the Bastion out to perform the wedding because nobody else will. So that's an example of a rogue Bastion. But the place where it gets confusing is that if you have, say, someone who's not giving a get, and Ora is out there rallying, this person is not cooperating with the get, he could then get a letter from a rogue Bastion and say, nope, I'm doing everything I need to do according to Rabbi XYZ. And the average person in the community can't always separate, who is this a legitimate Beit Din? Is this not a legitimate Beit Din? And all the batei din have basically the same name. It's all some Beit Din, Shar, Mishpat, Tzedek, blah, blah, blah. Like it's all some version of the same name, which I think adds to the confusion. We have a spreadsheet of all the batei din so we can track their formal names, the rabbis involved when they splinter off. They also change leadership. You could have a Beit Din that's run by a Rav that is, maybe things have changed and he's not the one running things on the ground now. And there's another person who's really running things. And so what I can't emphasize enough is that you need to do your research. You need to make sure you're going to a Bastion that is a safe environment. And especially for those of you coming from domestic abuse situations, you really need a Bastion that is trained on abuse, because otherwise, if anyone's ever hung out with abusers in this crowd, they're really charming and really good at manipulating systems. And a Bastion that isn't trained to screen is gonna have a very hard time getting that right. Do you want to jump in,
I have a
Shoshanna?
question. Yeah, I have a question for you regarding what you're saying, because it's like, do your research. So I want people to know, where do they do their research? Do they go to Ora? I mean, I'm assuming you're in the States right now, because in Israel, you can't choose your Beit Din. So let's just put that to the side. So if you're in the States, how do you know which batei din deal with abuse? When I was there in October interviewing current and former agunot, every single one of them said they didn't know how to deal with abuse. They didn't know how to deal with narcissism, to the point where the rabbi looked at her and said, I don't know. I can't help you. Like, I can't deal with abuse. He's just saying no. Like, so she's like, but you're the rabbi. What am I supposed to do? And she didn't have any answers. So that was for me very, very painful and frustrating for them. Where is this magical research?
Very good question. I would say, I mean, obviously, because we have a service and we have a helpline, I would say call us. I will be very transparent and say that I wish I had a super long list of fantastic Bataydin to refer everyone to. It is a short list. I have a decent list of where not to go. So there's that as well. There are many Bataydin that will have a get appointment, but really do not deal with contested gittin. There are actually relatively few Bataydin that will deal with contested gittin, and that's often not clear as you go through the process. And it is absolutely something I've seen in many Bataydin, especially the ones that don't deal with contested cases, is that if the guy's like, oh, I'm not in the mood to give a get right now, actually, they're like, oh, okay, call us if you change your mind. And they don't always have anything to offer besides that. And so when it comes to advising people, I can't pretend that there's sort of a magical world where, you know, you get exactly the right phone number and the whole process is going to be perfect. This is a really messy process. There is a deep need for training in every area, I think, of this community in terms of how we understand domestic abuse, how we deal with domestic abuse, and how we avoid that very human instinct to not get involved. And you will see forums that should be adjudicating a case that will just be like, oh, we don't want to be involved. And so there is a lot of need for training and for culture change. But for those of you going through it today, just can't stress enough to get information about the specific Bataydin that you're considering. And I'll just share a quick story example. I don't want to run us too late. I spoke with a woman once who had heard great things about a certain Beitin, wanted to go there. And I said, it's your decision. You know, we're here to support you, whatever you do. But just so you know, if you go there, for sure, he's going to order therapy. And she said, there's no way. My husband was in prison for assaulting me. It's not possible. I said, I would bet money on it. So she still wanted to work with this Bastion. She called, and before she signed anything, she said, just so I know, out of curiosity, would you suggest therapy in a case like this? And she said, and the Rav responded, of course, therapy is always the first place to start. And so again, despite what people are telling you, you really can't compare a sort of good divorce with a high conflict, narcissist, manipulator, abuse divorce. And so we see these cases all the time and can guide people on where to go. One quick project that I want to plug as well, just while we're here and while you're here, is that both Orach Chavat Nashim, other agencies, are working to gather reviews essentially of Bataydin from people who have experience with the Bastion. And so if you have personal experience and know people who have, this is a great way where we can sort of use the power of the people, so to speak. Many of us have been through these processes, and we want to facilitate better ways to get the information, almost the glass door reviews, for those of you who have seen that for employment reviews, to get the information behind the curtain to people as they're making decisions and looking for information, because you must know before you sign. And the last thing I'll say, I'm talking for a while, you should know that in the United States, an arbitration agreement signed in a Bastion, even in Hebrew or Yiddish, is legally binding as an arbitration agreement. And so you sign that paper and you are in that Bastion, and unless they decide to release you, you are there. So I can't emphasize enough to do all the research you can before you sign your name on a piece of paper, committing yourself to an arbitration process.
So Daphne, Zofa had, it's quite a while ago, we put out this guideline to the Beit Din system.
Yes.
And have we upgraded that? It was really
so this conversation is I think came in tandem with the fact that we have upgraded our guide to the Beit Din, which will be published on the website shortly, which we can share also with people who have registered for this webinar. We'll also share, Shoshanna and Keshet, the link to the questionnaire that I know has been circulating for those who are on social media on various mailing lists, and we'll share that with you. And also some people have been asking for contact information. So if you don't grab all of this from the chat, there'll be a follow-up email if you register through the channel. So certainly we are more than happy to share all of that information because knowledge is power. I want to ask a variant of the choosing the Beit Din. Blu, when do people, or how do people choose whether to go to the Basin of America versus the International Bastion, for example? Like, at what point do people come to the International Bastion?
Good. Thank you for asking that question. So the Beit Din of America is actually the first stop. It's fairly standard. It's also has, as I said, centralized Batei Din around the country. And the people who come to the International Beit Din are people who have been through, women primarily, but some men too, who have been through the ringer, who have, there's no chance that a mediator would help in a situation. It's very frequently cases of physical abuse, verbal abuse, a serious defect, and a lot of it, of course, is also recalcitrance for purposes of extortion. So I would say that we have some cases that come directly to the International Beit Din, and the majority of our cases are actually resolved with the giving of a get. But in very extreme cases, the rabbis use non-get solutions from the tradition, systemic solutions that have been used over the centuries, not widely, but in cases of emergency, I call them, as I said in our last webinar, back pocket solutions that Dayanim have when there's really no chance of a woman getting a get. So that is the story. We always prefer a get. And I think our ratio of resolving hardcore cases is something like 60% to 40%, 60% get a get and 40% or less. But actually I call those gitin leveraged gitin, because what happens in some of those cases, when a husband realizes, an extortionist realizes that he's not going to get his money by withholding the get, he gives a get, he realizes that he's not going to get anything if he waits too long. We had a case actually, Keshet told a good story, I'm going to tell a quick story. We had a case where a woman came after 5 years, her husband wanted $250,000 for the get, and he dragged her around for 5 years to different Batei Din, and finally she said to him, I'm going to the International Beit Din, not going to go to another court of your choosing. And she came to the International Beit Din. The rabbis worked with her for several months and found a solution, found that he fell into the category of kiddushay ta'ut, a marriage that was entered into under false pretenses. And they wrote a psak din for her and told her, as I said, it was 5 months later, and they told her that her psak din was ready. She could, expect it in the following week, come to pick it up in the following week. And the Sunday night before she was supposed to come to pick it up, she called and said she got her get. And what happened is that was a case of a leveraged get, as her husband realized he's not going to get his $250,000, and if he waits another week, he's going to get zero. So he went to another Beit Din, and he got $17,000, which is also extortion. And she was rejoiced. She rejoiced. And actually, our Beit Din, we don't do anything that handles money for a get. We were also very happy for her, even though we recognized it was a case of extortion. But that was a leveraged get. Now, some rabbis would say that was a coerced get, as there are cases in Israel where a woman has gotten a get. Shoshanna knows a lot about these cases here. There's a case in Ashkelon where a woman got a get after waiting a number of years, and the husband said the next day that he was coerced into giving the get, and the Beit Din reversed it and told her that she wasn't divorced after all. And what happened is it got into the press, and there was a hue and cry, and the rabbinical court, the central rabbinical court, put pressure on the Ashkelon court, and they reversed their decision again. And the get that she was given became valid. So there's a lot of bad stuff that goes on in, Beit Din that aren't totally straight and that don't always have a woman's interest at heart. Don't treat women equally or fairly.
Very diplomatic way to say that, Blue. Are we being diplomatic today? It's not my strong point. I think I was actually, I'm glad, Daphne, that you asked that question, because I was going to mention the International Bastion, which I would personally say is the first place to go. There's no reason to go anywhere else. They're the best. They don't charge you. They are scholars. They care about you. Every case has a woman with the woman who is the aguna, or the woman wanting a divorce, depending on how you choose to say it. And they are absolutely dedicated to justice and Torah. And that is what I would, I expected of a Beit Din when I stood with my aunt in the Beit Din in Yerushalayim for so many years, and found the exact opposite, apathy, corruption, just absolute hefkerut. Like it would have been a joke if it was a television show, except that it was someone's life. And that's how I got into this to begin with. And so I think while I respect tremendously, Keshet, you saying, do your research. I love you, but I would just say, go to the International Bastion and go there, because to be honest, like, why would you joke around? Like, why go somewhere where they're going to say, I can't give a hazmanah, or I can't order him to come, or I can't do this because he's not going to listen. Why would you go to a place that won't consider the fact that maybe you married a psychopath who didn't disclose that he had a medical condition, or she had a medical condition, and married you under false pretenses? In Israel, they have used these halachic tools sparingly, absolutely not close to the way that they should, but they are valid halachic tools. And as Blue said, they are even more valuable as leverage, because if the guy knows that extortion is off the table, which is another thing the International Bastion does, it doesn't allow extortion. I don't want this to be a commercial for the International Bastion, but if we're talking about Beit Din and how to choose, and I'm going on the record, would not trust most of even the Beit Din of America, Beit Din, given what I know of the Dayanim, some Dayanim there. And I know this is recorded, and I'm okay with that.
Thank you.
I'll just, if I may, Daphne, if it's okay. I love that we're just being very open here. I think there's a real need for that. And the only thing I'll add as well is that I think where it gets so messy is just that people are coming from really different communities, that we find that as we've seen more and more, thank God, modern Orthodox cases coming to us with prenups, and we're dealing with a prenup enforcement process, increasingly our call volume is coming from Haredi communities, Hasidic communities. And in some cases, I've seen people get a lot of social blowback from choosing something out of the box for their community, such as IBD. So I think it's just a question of what community you're in, what your risk tolerance is. Do you want to remarry? Do you not want to remarry? Do you want to have more children? Who do you want to date? And so those are a lot of the conversations that we're having with people. And I personally take a very kind of social work-ish approach to this, in that I'm not a social worker, but in that I want to help you identify in the overwhelm and in the chaos. I want to help you identify what matters to you and figure out how we can best get you there. And I always feel that at ORA, we're kind of, at least personally, I always feel like I'm working on two planes. There's the world that I want to create that doesn't exist yet. And there's a lot of prevention and advocacy and education work going there. And then there's, you're here now and you need help today. And I'm going to guide you in the very real world that we're in now. And so balancing those two is hard, but I think that's why people just come from such different places. And it is at least great to see that the cases are moving. And I got a prenup question from a Satmar woman the other day. So, interesting things are happening in the world, and there is so much work to be done. I would never underestimate it, but I think there is movement, and these conversations are happening in communities that were never open to these conversations before.
I have to jump in here, even though I know we want to go into the next question, but there was one comment that you made, Keshet, that I just want to clarify, which is that the implication that if a woman comes to the International Bastion, that she has to be concerned about remarriage. And I know that that is an accusation that we've heard from our opposition, and you're familiar with that. And that is, that doesn't really, it's not, I would say it's not legitimate or not fair. And we do have women who have been released from terrible marriages, oppression, prison in their eyes. And yes, they have been remarried. So the International Bastion also has a record of remarriage of women who are released through non-get solutions, just clarifying the record there.
No, for sure. And I'm actually thinking of a pre-International Bastion situation. The International Bastion didn't exist, but a woman had a hetzer, and again, a very halachically sound, legitimately based hetzer. And I spoke to maybe 10 shadchanim on her behalf, trying to explain that this was legitimate, that this was normative, and she just couldn't get set up on a date with the people that she wanted to date in her community. And I think it was more like misunderstanding and miscommunication on behalf of the shadchanim that she was working with and in the community she was in. But again, for some people, they will say, I don't think that's going to be an issue. For other people, they're very, very nervous about it. And so, and in that case, we would really work with them on, okay, who are the opinions that you care about? And let's figure out what they think. And let's, you know, come up with a process that's going to get you what you most want in the end.
Thank you. So I want to zoom out a little bit for a second, because, so first of all, I love that we're having this open conversation, because like it is so important for everybody to know all of the information as they go into this, and to have all the considerations. A little bit nuts and bolts, right? We talked about having a woman come in, not having a woman come in. What are the kind of accepted standards of who is in the room when a get is adjudicated or throughout the process? Number one, I guess that's two questions. And then the next question is, what actually happens? Like, what are the physical mechanics that happen the day that the get is written?
So if anybody wants to take that out, I'll be happy to take that. Actually, this is, Rabbi Dollinger wrote me I have actually never been inside of a Beit Din. I'm very involved with the workings of the International Beit Din, but I haven't been at Yeshivat Beit Din, and I have never been to Yeshivat Beit Din of any other Beit Din. Maybe that's something to be proud of, and that I don't lead a life of litigious interactions. But so, and I've known a little bit about what goes on in the Beit Din, and I certainly know women who have gotten a get, but I'll just read this very briefly, because he worked for the Beit Din of America. He was an intern for the Beit Din of America, and he writes from this experience. The husband will authorize the sofer, and he has to authorize the sofer because he is the one who writes the Sefer Kritut, to write the get, which is in Hebrew, is written on a cloth. And that usually takes about a half hour, making sure to include all the names, all the nicknames, the various names. The get is then signed by two witnesses, usually rabbis who have experience with signing a cloth and using a quill. And it's also brought by the sofer. You don't have to bring it yourself. And once the get is complete, then the get is folded up in a small envelope-sized item, and it's placed in the hands of a woman who holds her hand out with her palms up. And then, and again, in the presence of two witnesses and a 3 dayan Beit Din. And then she's instructed to take the get, place it under her arm, and walk away with it, much like carrying a purse or something of the sort. Then she returns and hands the document to the dayanim, and they slash the get with a knife to destroy it. It was a minhag put in place to prevent folks from later going back and trying to nitpick because of problems. And then it's slashed and destroyed. And in its place, a patur, a release, is signed by the 3 dayanim. That a get was given. And this is the document used by the Batei Din all over the world. the get is almost never used. And actually, there is, in many cases, there's a central warehouse, a central registry, but a central warehouse where /gitin are stored for a number of years. And that is essentially, and the law is prohibited, the law prohibiting digging them up to look for problems, although that does happen. So that is the Beit Din procedure in a nutshell, as per Rabbi Barry Dollinger. Keshet, have you been in a Beit Din, Yeshivat Beit Din?
It's funny, I have not. My colleagues have. The challenge we have at ORA is that we're usually not like BFFs with the get refuser when they decide to give the get. So we generally excuse ourselves from attending the proceedings in case we bring some tension into the room. One quick program I'll plug, because I feel like some of our audience here could be perfect participants. We had to pause this during COVID, but we're pleased God restarting it, is matching volunteers to accompany women to Beit Din. It makes such a difference to go in with someone. You should never go in alone. I mean, if you feel confident doing it, great, but a lot of people need some extra support. Some people have great social networks, some people don't. And so if anyone listening would be interested in volunteering in that capacity, we match you and set you up, but we get these requests, and it can just be a great way to support women in a vulnerable moment. And it also creates a stopgap where if you're sort of handed a settlement agreement, surprisingly, you have someone with you to evaluate what's going on and to take a pause.
So the International Beit Din also has a policy that we have. At the beginning, we called them the angels, but they didn't like the term the angels. We call them now the associates, primarily mental health professionals, who each one is, we have 6 and they rotate, and each is assigned to a case and stays with the aguna throughout the case. And what's very interesting, not only that the agunot say how valuable and special this help is, but the rabbis also say their input, their presence and their input with the Yeshivat Beit Din and staying with the aguna throughout is very helpful. So yes, it's amazing that women used to go into these situations, you know, with 3 rabbis, three male witnesses, two witnesses, 3 dayanim, an angry husband, and she alone defending herself, so to speak. So
I think
that has changed. Shoshanna.
I think I'd like to talk about it again. It's you know, yes, I shockingly I'm the only person in the Zoom that has actually witnessed a get. I refused to leave the room when my aunt was finally given her get. I said, if I don't see this with my own eyes, I'm not going to believe it. It took 14 years, and so I was not leaving. And it's very. Someone mentioned in the comments that there's a lot of hemming and hawing over the names. What is your name? How do you spell your name? If it's Yiddish, forget it. Kitzel, just bring a few options of, not options, a few verifications of your name and his name and your father's name, so that they don't waste your life worrying about the names. Okay, that's first of all. How have they worried about the ketubah so much? Okay, fine. Sorry, but point being this: I have seen. I haven't been here 20 years, but I've been here 14 years. And in the past 25 to 30 years that there have been to'enot. A to'en is a male advocate in Beit Din. To'enet is a female, or to'enes in Ashkenazis. And without going into the whole history, they're a relatively new phenomenon, but they game-changing phenomenon. Women who are trained in halachot of gittin, of halachot of marriage, and who are able to stay, not forget for a moment that she's a female, and that a woman is really not going to tell her most personal and intimate details to a man, how she was abused, what he made her do, what she feels, how hurt she is, how sad she is, how depressed she is. Because mental health was certainly not something you discussed, and it's really not even something as much as it's gotten better now. So until women started representing women, both in a legal way, but also in a halachic way, the woman was at a complete and total disadvantage. Now you have here in Israel professional women. The Beit Din didn't let them come into the Beit Din. Then they didn't let them into the door. They didn't give them the certificates. And now they give them cases. They say, you should represent this woman. It has changed Beit Din here completely. That's first of all. And so yes, female representation is important. I know from Joanne Greenaway in London, having a female in the system itself means that the cases that have been sitting left there for 20 years, she actually picks them up, dusts it off, opens it up, and cares. Okay, so that's first of all. So in Israel, there are toanot that you can hire, and they're legal and whatever. In America, the only one I know is Yael Braun, and she is amazing. We had her on a podcast. She's on Instagram. She should be here on this panel. She's absolutely phenomenal. And if you need, if you're in contention or you want advice, she's open, she's willing. She's on Instagram. She's called the divorce specialist. Beit trusts her. The Beit and I say that. Basin of America trusts her. Thank you. And so she's definitely someone else that you can be in touch with. And she's great. She's really, really great. So yeah. Female representation is absolutely a vital thing. I would never go alone into a Basin, even if you think you got it all covered. I would strongly advise you to go with someone. Did I answer the question?
It's so refreshing to hear you say that, because I remember a Kolech conference of maybe 12 years ago or so, 10, 15 years ago. A woman on the panel did a PhD thesis on how the Toanot were being treated by the Dayanim in the Batei Din around the country. It was a Shanda and Shanda Busha that they almost ignored them, or they all but ignored them. So it's nice to know that in 15 years that has changed totally. One more thing that has changed totally.
I would just add super quickly as well. I was in touch with a group of women who are also trained to become Toanot. So Yael is also the only person I know doing this right now, but it's great to see that it seems to be catching on. And I'm just interested to see where we're at in 5 years, 10 years in terms of women in this space.
And I'd like to see it in a year or 2 years.
Yeah, agreed.
Which program?
So I know of a few individual women that are doing it and trying to train, or people with Israel, because we get contacted by people, and it's just interesting because I had heard of, I'm trying to think when I met Yael, probably 2 years ago, maybe. I'm trying to remember exactly, but it seems to be something that other people are thinking of doing and starting to do, which,
excellent.
Yeah, so it's exciting to see that.
So I want to, I'm sorry, Blu, did you want to say something?
Okay, go right ahead.
No, go.
I was going to say there was an attempt to bring Toanot to America, but actually some of the Dayanim, some of the Dayanim in the Beit of America objected to it, and so they couldn't bring them, and so that's why we don't have Toanot
formalized
in America.
A subject for another webinar, I hope. But my question, my closing question to each of you is, and there's so much more to unpack, but what is your top advice for women who are considering getting divorced, or who are imminently in need of divorce? Blu.
Well, I think we've covered all the top advice. I think what Keshet said with her opening remarks, and also what Shoshanna said, I think that pretty much covers the waterfront. And it being educated, don't go into this blind, and take a step back and get a friend, and certainly a Toanot. But it can be a male friend also. We had a case in Riverdale with a woman in New Jersey who was 15 years, her husband had remarried and had children in the new marriage, and she was still waiting for a get. And there was a man in Riverdale, from a very happily married family man, who basically took up her case to help her get through. So everybody needs an advocate in those difficult situations. What else can I say? I think I have nothing more to add than all the advice that was given before. And I'm happy that JOFA will put out its guidelines. It was very comprehensive. And Keshet sent a message around before that ORA is, offers all the informational services by phone, etc. So Yad L'Isha, we we're just, we still have an enormous problem of injustice in the community, but we're light years ahead in terms of the support systems that are in place now for women.
Mhm.
When
Thank you.
Shoshanna's aunt, I thought it was 25 years, Shoshana, but it was 14 years that she waited. And there were no supports, maybe a niece or two.
Thank you.
I actually have advice, not for someone who's already knowing that she needs a divorce, because we covered that, but I would say to all of you listening who are either happily married or not yet married, sign a postnup or a prenup and get everyone else to do it. Because even though it is not a catch-all solution, it's currently outside of the International Bastion, which is unfortunately not yet accepted everywhere by everyone. It's a really good place to start for two reasons. Number one, it actually helps. It really can help in most of the cases, okay? It's a legal document. We can talk about that separately, and you can ask Keshet about it in the States. But beyond that, you're taking a step to do something, which means that you are changing the way people see marriage and divorce. And if you sign a postnup and you post it, which we did in the States, we did in Israel, my husband and I did a few years ago ourselves personally, but we also had parties and events. If you do that and you post it, and you have your children sign it, and you have your friends sign it, you're changing the way people see get refusal, and get refusal will go down the more we refuse to accept it. And I don't think it's only for people who are ready to get divorced. I think every single person, every single Jewish couple needs to sign this for every other single Jewish couple. And that's what I'm saying. That's my advice.
Keshet.
So I would say to wrap up and reiterate, number one, just know your rights. You have them, find out what they are. Number two, don't do this by yourself. Most people really struggle with that. There is so much support out there. We also run support groups at ORA, and there's informal support as well, connecting with other women who have been through this and just getting some guidance and just getting people in your corner that you can talk to when you've had a hard day. And I think what you said, Shoshanna, was so beautiful, that it's not just about the people who are suffering. I can safely say that all of us on this call agree that we have to do this better. We are not serving the needs of women who are going through divorce and who are struggling with abuse with the divorce process. We have to do it better, and it is never going to happen if only the people personally impacted engage and do something. So we need everyone's support. And what I love about prenups and postnups, and I know there are some questions about enforcement that we can maybe get to in the Q&A, is that they're a great way to take a stand, not only about get refusal, but about what all relationships should be founded on, which is trust, respect, safety, and really emotional and mental health. And it's creating a community where we want relationships on these strong foundations. And that's what we want for ourselves, for our children, for our friends, for all the people that we love. So just thank you for having me here, and what an honor to present with people who give so much of themselves to the community and to creating positive change.
Thank you. Thank you. I think, Blu, you had one more thing you wanted to add.
Just advice that I think we should take, advice from the Catholic Church that we should take into our
Gosh.
which is that in the 1980s, they instituted in various cities that have heavy Catholic populations that a priest would not marry a couple unless they went for counseling 6 months before the marriage. And what we're finding is that the patterns of abuse are just characteristic of certain people. And if women would have had a slight insight into this before they got married, they never would have married. Signs were so obvious. So I think parents and couples themselves should go for counseling before they get married.
Wise advice. I'm just noting a couple of comments. I'm mindful of time. I know that people have places to be, so I just want to flag a couple of comments. There are a lot of comments about the prenup and really encouraging people to sign a prenup and a postnup. Somebody's asking if we can insist that rabbis are penalized for marrying couples without prenups. That's one possibility. I know that it is the growing trend that many rabbis won't perform a marriage without a prenup. The other growing trend we're seeing is synagogues with social halls who rent out their social halls for weddings also are now starting to get on the, well, we'll only rent you the social hall if you sign a halachic prenup bandwagon. There are a couple more questions in the chat that I would love to get to, but I'm mindful of time. So maybe we will try and do a follow-up conversation to this. Certainly, we will share the information if you want to find out more about Chochmat Nashim, about ORA, about JOFA, about the International Bastion. If you want to complete the survey, if you want to get involved with the volunteer program to accompany women who are on their way to receiving their get, we will send all of that information in a follow-up email along with contact information or ways to get in touch with the panelists. So I want to thank Blu, Keshet, and Shoshanna. This is an honor and a pleasure. And I don't want to use the word fun, but it is always good to be in your company. I hope one day we can do it on a fun topic. And thank you to everybody who joined us, and have a great day.
Thank you, Daphne, for a wonderful job.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I just want to say that I did clarify the Center for Women's Justice does not give advice unless there's an actual, the get is being refused and she's actually an aguna, depending on whose term. So I felt really bad that I didn't know for sure, so I asked.
Thank you. Thank you for the clarification.
Of course.
Also, everything you shared, Shoshana, is my impression also that, and I think Yad L'Isha also internally refers if it's a good impact litigation case that makes sense for, Mobile Satum or a tort case, etc.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot of really great, amazing resources. I think Yad L'Isha in general, if someone doesn't know what, where, how, their first step, and then that's what we're kind of talking to here, like people's first steps, then I know them well, and I really think that they give excellent advice, and it's free legal advice, which a lot of people have. Most of us need to worry about money. So
yeah.
So,
okay. Thank you again.
right. Thanks, guys. It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much.